The dog tags were supposed to be buried with her husband forever. Yet on a warm Tuesday morning, 3 years after his funeral, CEO Vivian Hartwell saw those same silver tags hanging against the chest of a stranger, and nearly collapsed in the middle of a crowded charity event. The man wearing them was a single father named Callum Reeves, a quiet former Navy SEAL who had been hired to help coordinate security for the event. Vivian knew the engraving on those tags better than she knew her own reflection. One carried her late husband's name, Everett Hartwell. The other carried his blood type and service number. There was no possibility she had mistaken them. She had watched Everett's casket disappear beneath the earth with those tags resting against his uniform. And now they were hanging from the neck of a man who looked at her with the startled expression of someone who had just discovered a ghost. If you believe kindness can heal wounds, forgiveness can change lives, hope can survive even the darkest loss, and second chances are worth fighting for, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps our family bring more stories of courage, love, and unexpected miracles to our community. Vivian had built Hartwell Industries from a small family manufacturing company into a national enterprise, but none of her business achievements mattered to her in that moment. The ballroom around her continued moving, filled with donors, executives, waiters carrying trays, and families who had come to support veterans and their children, yet all Vivian could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Callum stood near the entrance with a little girl beside him, perhaps 8 years old, holding a sketchbook against her chest. He looked nothing like the polished executives Vivian spent her days negotiating with. His clothes were modest, his posture straight, and there was something guarded in his expression that suggested he had spent years learning how to notice danger before anyone else did. But Vivian wasn't looking at his face. She was looking at the dog tags. She walked toward him slowly, each step bringing back memories she had spent years trying to lock away. Everett had worn those tags everywhere. He had worn them when he came home from deployments. He had worn them beneath dress shirts at family dinners. He had once joked that if he ever lost his wallet, the tags would still tell anyone who found him where he belonged. Vivian had teased him about his superstition. Then came the mission that ended his life. The official report had said his team had been ambushed during an extraction operation overseas. Everett had saved 2 men before the vehicle was destroyed. He had been declared dead after his remains were recovered. The military had returned his belongings, including 1 set of dog tags. Vivian had placed them in the coffin herself. Now a stranger was wearing them. Callum noticed her staring and instinctively touched the tags beneath his shirt. His expression changed from confusion to recognition of her grief. He gently moved his daughter behind him, not because he feared Vivian, but because years of military training had taught him to protect the vulnerable first. Vivian demanded to know where he had gotten the tags, but her voice broke before the question was fully spoken. Callum didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at his daughter, then back at Vivian, and something in his eyes told her this was not a simple story about stolen property. The little girl, whose name was Elsie, had been watching them carefully. She stepped forward and told Vivian that her father never took the tags off because they belonged to a man who had saved his life. Vivian felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Callum finally explained that he had served alongside Everett during his final deployment. Everett had not died exactly as the official report described. There had been an additional part of the story that never made it into the public record. During the mission, Callum had been trapped beneath wreckage after the vehicle was struck. Everett had returned for him despite orders to evacuate. He had pulled Callum free, taken the impact of a secondary blast, and then forced Callum to leave before the area became completely compromised. Callum had survived because Everett had chosen to risk everything for him. But the dog tags were not the strangest part. Callum reached inside his jacket and removed a small weathered envelope. He explained that Everett had given him the tags shortly before the final evacuation, telling him to keep them only if Everett didn't make it home. Callum had promised that if he survived, he would find Everett's family and return them. But he never had the chance. He had been hospitalized for months after the mission, followed by rehabilitation and medical discharge. By the time he was physically able to travel, he learned that Everett's family had been told he was dead and that the investigation had been closed. Callum tried to contact Vivian through military channels, but his letters were returned because Vivian had moved and changed her business address. Eventually, he stopped trying because he believed she had built a new life and might not want a stranger reopening the wound. Vivian stared at the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. She recognized Everett's handwriting immediately. Her husband had written only a few sentences. He had told Callum that if anything happened to him, Vivian needed to know that he had never been afraid of dying because he knew she and the people he loved were worth protecting. But Everett had added something else, something Vivian had never heard before. He had asked Callum to watch over a man named Graham Vale, an old friend who had been struggling with a serious business problem before the deployment. Everett believed Graham had discovered something dangerous inside Hartwell Industries and had promised to investigate it when he returned. Vivian's grief suddenly collided with another emotion, fear. For 3 years, she had believed Everett's death was an unavoidable tragedy. She had blamed fate, war, and herself for not convincing him to leave the military sooner. But Callum's story suggested there were pieces of Everett's final days that nobody had told her. She took Callum to a private conference room and asked him everything he remembered. Callum explained that Everett had been increasingly concerned about financial records connected to Hartwell Industries. He had suspected someone was diverting money through a chain of shell companies. Everett had told Callum he didn't trust one particular executive, but he had never revealed the man's name. Vivian immediately thought of Graham Vale. Graham had been Everett's closest business advisor and had remained loyal to Vivian after her husband's death. He had helped her navigate the company through its most difficult years. He had even encouraged her to expand internationally. Vivian had trusted him so completely that the thought of betrayal seemed impossible. Yet Callum remembered something else. Everett had told him that if he couldn't return, Callum should make sure Vivian received a blue notebook hidden inside a storage cabinet at Everett's old workshop. Vivian had never known about the notebook. The two of them drove to the workshop during the afternoon, with Elsie sitting quietly in the back seat. Vivian expected to find nothing, but Callum searched the room with the precision of someone trained to notice what others overlooked. Behind a row of old tools was a cabinet Vivian hadn't opened since Everett's funeral. Inside was the blue notebook. Its pages contained dates, account numbers, initials, and notes about transactions that had been concealed from the company's main financial records. The evidence suggested millions had been quietly siphoned away over several years. Vivian felt sick. Graham had been the person managing those financial systems. The discovery shattered more than her trust in a business partner. It forced her to reconsider every memory she had of Everett's final year. Had he been trying to tell her something? Had he known someone was watching him? Had his death really been an unfortunate consequence of war, or had someone deliberately manipulated events because they feared what he might uncover? Callum urged her not to make accusations without evidence. His military instincts were clear, facts first, emotion second. But Vivian noticed something else. Callum never once tried to profit from the information. He could have demanded money. He could have threatened the company. Instead, he simply wanted to fulfill a promise made to a fallen friend. That realization changed something inside her. For years, Vivian had believed strength meant controlling everything. She had built an empire because she couldn't bear the feeling of helplessness that followed Everett's death. She worked harder, trusted fewer people, and convinced herself that grief was something successful people simply learned to hide. Yet Callum's presence showed her another kind of strength. He had lost friends, survived trauma, raised a child alone, and still found room in his heart to keep a promise to a man who had saved his life. Vivian began quietly investigating the financial records with the help of independent auditors. Within weeks, the evidence became overwhelming. Graham had indeed orchestrated a complex fraud scheme. But the most devastating discovery was that Everett had been preparing to expose him before his final deployment. Graham had known Everett was investigating and had tried to pressure him into stopping. There was no proof Graham had caused Everett's death, but there was proof that he had deliberately concealed crucial information about Everett's investigation after the funeral, allowing the fraud to continue. Vivian confronted Graham during a daytime board meeting. The evidence was placed before him, and for the first time in years, the confident executive looked genuinely frightened. He admitted the fraud, claiming he had started by borrowing money to cover a failed investment and then became trapped in a cycle of deception. He denied involvement in Everett's death, and the investigators found no evidence connecting him to the military operation. Vivian could have destroyed him publicly. Instead, she allowed the authorities to handle the matter and refused to turn the investigation into revenge. That decision surprised Callum. Vivian explained that Everett had saved a man's life because he believed people were more important than vengeance. She couldn't honor Everett by becoming consumed by hatred. Months passed, and Vivian's relationship with Callum slowly changed. What began as suspicion became gratitude, then friendship, and eventually something neither of them expected. Callum continued working modestly, refusing Vivian's offers to give him money simply because he had saved Everett. He wanted to provide for Elsie through his own work. Vivian respected that independence, and she began supporting a veteran scholarship program instead of giving him personal financial gifts. Elsie became the bridge between them. The little girl loved visiting Vivian's office, where she would sit by the window drawing pictures while her father worked nearby. Vivian discovered that Elsie had inherited Callum's quiet courage and Everett's habit of noticing people who felt invisible. One afternoon, Elsie gave Vivian a drawing of 3 people standing beneath a large tree. She explained that the tree represented family and that the 3 people were her father, Vivian, and herself. Vivian cried when she saw it. Not because it reminded her of what she had lost, but because it showed her what she still had the power to build. On the anniversary of Everett's death, Vivian returned to his grave during the afternoon with Callum and Elsie. For years she had visited alone, carrying flowers and leaving quickly because staying too long made the grief unbearable. This time, she stood there without running from the pain. Callum removed Everett's dog tags from around his neck and placed them gently in Vivian's hands. He told her through his quiet presence what words could never fully express: the promise had finally been kept. Vivian closed her fingers around the silver tags and allowed herself to remember Everett not as the man she lost, but as the man who had loved fiercely, sacrificed without hesitation, and left behind a legacy of courage that continued through the people he touched. She then surprised Callum by returning the tags to him. They were not hers anymore, she realized. They belonged to the promise he had carried. She told him that Everett had saved his life, but Callum had spent 3 years honoring that sacrifice by protecting the truth and refusing to abandon the promise. The tags were not simply a reminder of death. They were proof that one person's kindness could travel through time and reach people they never imagined they would touch. Callum accepted them with tears in his eyes. Elsie reached for both their hands, and for the first time, Vivian felt something she had thought grief had taken from her forever: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting. The kind that comes from finally understanding. Everett had not returned to her through the dog tags. He had returned through the courage he left inside another man, through a child who learned that kindness could become a legacy, and through a woman who finally understood that opening her heart again did not betray the person she had lost. It honored him. Years later, Vivian would still keep the blue notebook locked safely away, not as evidence of betrayal but as a reminder that truth can survive even when people try to bury it. Hartwell Industries established a foundation for military families, and Callum became one of its advisors. Elsie grew into a confident young woman who often told people that her father taught her how to survive, while Vivian taught her how to forgive. And whenever Vivian saw the silver dog tags resting around Callum's neck, she no longer saw the painful symbol of the husband she had lost. She saw a promise fulfilled. She saw a life saved. She saw a friendship born from sacrifice. And she understood that sometimes the greatest second chances arrive disguised as the very thing we once believed would break our hearts. Before we reach the end, leave a meaningful comment and tell us what you believe was the greatest lesson in this story: forgiveness, loyalty, courage, or the power of keeping a promise. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because Everett's story was never really about the dog tags. It was about what they carried. A promise. A sacrifice. A truth. And the beautiful reminder that love does not always disappear when someone leaves this world. Sometimes, it lives on in the person who remembers, the person who forgives, and the person who chooses to carry someone else's hope until it finally reaches home.